What are the tech advances now that are kind of enabling this agentic AI, next gen form of a chatbot?
So previous iterations were based on RAG, retrieval augmented generation, right? So they were able to, receive an input from a user in a very, potentially nuanced conversational way and go look at a corpus of information, right? It could be a smaller model that's trained on just help center material. It could be, ChatGPT, which is trained on the internet, right? And they were able to sort of parse that data and come up with responses to queries. But now we're moving into a new paradigm with agentic.
How are these autonomous agents now impacting enterprise architecture, how they're incorporating them into the contact center architecture and more broadly through the organization?
Data availability and data organization is something that you have to take into account. How your internal knowledge is organized is really important for grounding any agent that you're going to deploy in the field. It may be unstructured data like your knowledge base, but it's really important to have a good sense of where that knowledge resides and the cleanliness of it, if you will, right? If you're relying on internal documentation to ground that agent, then you want to make sure that it's clean and there's not a lot of potentially conflicting, data in that repository. The kind of first level is making sure that the data architecture layer that these AI agents will need to access is organized.
Welcome to Tech Transformed Podcast, where we have a weekly conversation with people impacting the enterprise technology landscape. My name is Jon Arnold. I'm an independent technology analyst, and I've been following spaces like customer service, contact center, collaboration for a very long time. And in this episode today, I'm speaking with Calvin Hohener, who is the lead product manager at Dialpad. So for this episode, we're going to be talking about agentic AI in the customer experience space. More specifically, how autonomous agents are evolving from the challenges that they pose and what to expect in the future for enterprises. So welcome, Calvin.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Jon.
Same here. You're welcome. And thanks for joining us today. So before we dive into the world of agentic AI, tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Calvin Hohener. I'm a lead product manager, and I work on our agentic solution at Dialpad. I've been with the company about 6.5 years, so always in product, but more in many different hats, worked with many different teams, and now working on the exciting world of agentic AI. I think the overall message that I kind of want to impart in this talk is that the time is now, but it's not as scary or as daunting as it needs to be. There are a lot of good vendors out there providing really clean, useful solutions that are willing to work with you to solve your use cases. So get started. Once you start, you'll find that it's not as daunting as amazing.
I like that message. For the audience out there that's new to AI, what Calvin says is true, and I can validate that because in my line of work, I attend a lot of vendor events in this space. So I'm very, I hear the messaging from all of the vendors, and that's kind of a pretty common perspective, and it's an important one. Because, getting off on the right foot is so important because the last thing you want to do is have a bad AI experience, and that might put you off of AI big time. And that's, of course, not what we want to see. This trend is too important. So let's kind of define this a little bit. So if you could just, we'll kind of get the ball rolling here. If you could just talk about what you see as the most important technical change or changes that are shaping the AI landscape today. Of course, particularly on this whole customer experience, acronym flash, CX. So get used to it, folks. We talk CX now. I will not say customer experience again on this podcast.
Yeah. So, we touched on it briefly, but agentic is really the sort of pivotal, game-changing, paradigm-shifting technology change that's happening in customer experience today. So what really makes an agentic system different than previous AIs is the ability to actually do work, to actually complete tasks and take action in systems that you're giving access to for these AI systems, right? So that's really the key difference is previous AI models were able to retrieve and return information, and, kind of respond to inputs in more of a if A, give B type scenario. These new models are able to reason and actually accomplish tasks. Now, to support that, and importantly, there's sort of this ecosystem emerging where various software vendors are recognizing that they need to provide access to these systems in order for them to be functional, right? And so another acronym coming your way, but what's been developed is what's called MCP, Model Context Protocol, which essentially is this universal adapter layer, if you will, between all of these various softwares that allow agentic systems to access them and actually take action inside of them. So you can think of things like CRMs, ticketing systems, EMRs, anything can be stitched together now via this sort of adapter layer. So that's really an important consideration as well.
So moving from there, and we're going to come back to this term agentic in a moment. So getting beyond legacy chatbots, this is kind of the next theme we want to touch on here. So most of the people listening today have had experiences with chatbots, probably not great. So let's talk a little bit about, where are we today? So what key design limits held back earlier versions of conversational AI? And what are the tech advances now that are kind of enabling this agentic AI kind of next gen form of a chatbot, right?
Yeah. So previous iterations were based on RAG, retrieval augmented generation, right? So they were able to, receive an input from a user in a very, potentially nuanced conversational way and go look at a corpus of information, right? It could be a smaller model that's trained on just help center material. It could be, ChatGPT, which is trained on the internet, right? And they were able to sort of parse that data and come up with responses to queries, right? So if A, give me an output of B, they were able to produce information. And again, that's still incredibly useful for a number of scenarios, right? Like, it's the new help center, right? I don't go and find an article in a help center. I just ask the little chatbot at the top. It looks through all the articles and gives me my answer, right? So still a ton of very good uses for this sort of RAG-based models. But now we're moving into a new paradigm with agentic. And there are kind of three main technology shifts that have enabled this new paradigm. So the first is what we touched on briefly before, but that's tool calling or function calling. And that's the ability for an AI agent to actually take action in these other systems. They're actually able to write to these systems, right? They can make API calls. They can execute code. They can, take browser actions, file operations. All these types of things are now able to be performed by AI. And with that again comes this network of systems to which they now have access through MCP, as I touched on briefly before. So that's kind of the big definitional change, right? Is tool calling, function calling, the ability to actually do something in another system. I'd say there are two really important supporting things that have come along with that, sort of architectural paradigms. And the first is long context retrieval architecture. So basically what that means is AIs have a better memory than they used to have, right? They're able to carry the context from one step in a process to another, or from one process to another within the same conversation throughout the chain of a potentially, very complicated set of events in order to accomplish a workflow, right? So having that long memory, being able to refer back to a previous spot in the conversation to build that context in achieving a goal is a new support for, tool calling, which is sort of the main change. The second main sort of architectural shift is in more what are called planning executor frameworks. So it's pretty straightforward, but it's just the way that the AI operates, right? So it will think, it will take into account the context that it has and the intents and goals that it's sussed out in the conversation with the human, with the caller. And it will take an action. It will evaluate that outcome, and then it will adjust the next course of action based on what that outcome is, all in pursuit of that goal, right? And that goal can adjust and change within that conversation as well, because that context, that memory that the AI has can morph along with it. So it's that tool calling is the main thing, and then these kind of architectural shifts that are supporting that underneath the hood.
Yeah, that's really great, Calvin. That level of detail I think is really important to parse out what we're talking about here. So, for those who are technically inclined, I'm sure this is very exciting because it is for what AI can do. I just add a little bit of color from my analyst point of view. When we talk about legacy chatbots, this is, just like customer service where the bar has been so low for so long, it can only get better. So, there's a pain point there all businesses are struggling with. And it's the same thing, I think, with chatbots. We've generally had poor experiences with them because they're missing these pieces. So earlier generations of chatbots, which we are using, like the rationale, of course, is for self-service, right? To automate customer service with the customer so they don't have to wait an hour to talk to a live agent. So offload as much of the routine stuff as you can to a bot where you don't have to have much of a conversation. And that legacy chatbot model, just another layer of terminology, folks, would be called deterministic. In other words, like you said earlier, Calvin, if A, then B. So if it follows a script, it sticks to the script and it can do that job well. But it can only do that for limited complexity. Now, with agentic AI, the advances that you're bringing here in the conversation take it to another level where the autonomous ability of a bot now can make decisions and can handle interactions end to end without human intervention and can use the qualities that make us human. It can use judgment and reasoning to take things further than these kind of first generation bots could ever do. And that's the exciting change because now you can put them to work and automate not just those ABC kind of inquiries, but things that are a little bit more gray, have a little more unstructured context that has to be kind of figured out. So I think this is an important takeaway for the audience. And so with that, we have this agentic model. So let's talk about how this translates into real time impact for the business, right? So when these agents are used, what are the typical problems that they're addressing now? And where are you seeing results from their performance?
I think the key is just focusing on those use cases to begin with that are a bit mundane, a bit rote, a bit where you may think, hey, it's 2025. Can't an AI actually do this thing now? Well, now it actually can, right? So think of things like caller verification. Think of things like scheduling appointments, giving order status. Great internal use case that we have with one customer where it's a big global deployment. One of their biggest things that their internal IT desk handles is password resets, right? So there's a human getting calls from other employees and then firing off emails to let them reset their passwords, right? So and that's, estimated about 10% of this person's time, right? Which is now being offloaded to a digital agent, right? So it's those use cases that are perhaps a little bit simpler, that don't take very complex reasoning or sort of can fork off in many different ways. Yes, AI can definitely handle those, but again, there's guardrails in place for these agents to make sure that they're only specifically doing what you want them to do. So I think that quantification of the time that human agents are spending on these tasks really is kind of the first thing to figure out. Quantify what they're doing. If they're doing, I don't know, patient verification at the start of a call, how much time is that taking them, right? When it's just data entry, hopping from system to system. And then once you can quantify those things, that gives you sort of your ranking of your use cases to start with, right? The most impactful first. But then it also gives you a clear sense of ROI, right? If this task is taking, 20% of my human agent's time and I'm able to automate that, that gives that sort of immediate ROI. I think the other thing to think about though is it's not just that time savings. Like these agents can be evaluated as agents as well, right? And so it's really important to still keep an eye on the metrics that really matter for your support organization, CSAT, time to resolution, like all of those things that you really care about, and then measure how the introduction of these AI use case solvers is actually impacting those overall metrics, right? And you should see them increase. There's this element of like, taking the human sort of aspect away from these interactions, but think about like that's what's needed in some cases, right? That makes a more efficient and effective interaction. If all I need to do is reschedule my appointment, I don't want to wait on hold for 20 minutes to talk to a human to do that. I want to hop on immediately with a voice agent who can verify who I am, pull up my doctor's schedule and find a spot that works for both of us, right? And that can be done in a minute rather than waiting on hold. Real measurable results based on that sort of quantification, and then measuring everything else that really matters to you moving forward is the name of the game.
And I think it's important to point that out, Calvin, because contact centers by nature are driven by KPIs, but those metrics traditionally are operationally focused, not so much on customer outcomes. So I think the underlying takeaway here for the audience is that there are new metrics that are going to emerge that reflect, as you said, the performance of the bot itself, right? How effective is it? Because if it's not any more efficient than a human, then it's a waste of time and money, right? But clearly the results are happening. So let's take this a little further then, because we just have two more topics I want to be able to touch on today. How are these autonomous agents now impacting enterprise architecture? In other words, how they're incorporating them into the contact center architecture and more broadly through the organization, because they've got to be able to pull data from not just CRM, but from other sources across the enterprise.
Yeah, so I'll actually hit on that last point first. Data availability and data organization is something that you have to take into account, right? How your internal knowledge is organized is really important for grounding any agent that you're going to deploy in the field. It may be unstructured data like your knowledge base, but it's really important to have a good sense of where that knowledge resides and the cleanliness of it, if you will, right? If you're relying on internal documentation to ground that agent, then you want to make sure that it's clean and there's not a lot of potentially conflicting, data in that repository, right? So it doesn't get confused, because it's being fed conflicting info, right? So I think that's really the kind of first level, is making sure that the data architecture layer that these AI agents will need to access is organized. And again, it can be fragmented. It can be in different systems. You just have to know what's there and, know that it's clean and can be trusted to be deployed in the field, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is the role of the agent themselves is certainly going to change, right? If a lot of the, basic mundane data entry type tasks are being offloaded to AI, then human agents are left handling the more complex cases. They're left handling the escalations from that digital agent because the caller is trying to do something that digital agent hasn't been set up to do, right? Trying to accomplish a task that it hasn't been designed for. And then that gets escalated to a human agent. By its very nature, will be more complex, more detailed, and take more thought, right? So in a sense, that actually might change some of these metrics that we were just speaking about, even on the individual agent level, right? If I'm handling more complex cases, my time to resolution might change. That might be better. It might give me more fulfillment as an agent, but it's just something to keep in mind. The second aspect of that is human agents themselves are going to be taking more of what I'd call sort of like an advisory role over these digital agents that are being deployed in the field, right? They're going to be looking at traces of conversations, looking at what the outcomes were, and providing input to help tweak those models to ensure that they're actually providing the real, quality customer service that they're striving for, right? So there's kind of going to be this mentor-mentee relationship, if you will, between the human and the AI. The third thing to think about is this really changes, from a management perspective, the layers of evaluation that you need to account for, right? So again, touched on this briefly before, but there's the agent as AI, right? Is it actually able to accomplish the tasks that you want it to do? When it's a scheduling agent that you've created, when it's actually scheduling appointments, is it able to access those systems and actually properly schedule the appointments, delete them, remove them, reschedule, all those type of actions, right? So there's sort of evaluation of the agent in isolation. Then there's evaluation of the agent as agent, right? Compared to their human peers, what are their metrics? Some of the just like time-based ones might change, right? Time to resolution might just be on a different scale, but you want to ensure that it's at least on par with your human agents. CSAT, I think, is an important one. How the reaction to that agent is actually changing that customer satisfaction. And again, comparing the human, you want to make sure that these numbers are on par. And then lastly is the evaluation of those metrics in aggregate, right? Is the interjection of these AI agents actually benefiting my overall AI CSAT score, right? Is the health of the system generally improving because of the introduction of these AI agents? So yeah, the data is important, the agent's role is changing, and the manager's role is changing as well. And that doesn't even touch on actually creating these things, right? Or building them. That's just sort of the management of them.
So many pieces to this puzzle and so little time today. Um, well, we know, but this could go on for hours. And I think I'll just add a very high level piece to this is that when you're considering agentic AI for those in the audience, keep in mind, it's not a let's replace agents as fast as we can story as much as how AI can come into the contact center and be additive to complement, augment, enhance agent performance, and yes, make the operations more efficient. Bottom line is, if you're thinking about just getting rid of agents, that doesn't solve the problem because the inquiry volumes to your contact center are only going to get higher. We have more digital channels now. The activity just goes up and up and up. You can't hire agents to work yourself out of this mess. You need automation to handle this and get the most mileage out of your agents. Otherwise, you'll burn them out handling ridiculous manual kind of inquiries that they shouldn't be touching. Okay, so that'll bring us to our last kind of theme here, and that's for the C-level folks in the audience, and that's another part of this story, right? AI is a strategic trend, so it's not just something that lives in the contact center. It really impacts the CIO for all the technology investments, CTOs for the same reason, but also CFOs for the budgeting, and the CEOs, especially around things like brand, right? And of course, at doing what makes the company grow. So they have a lot of stake in this too, right? So maybe talk a bit about, as a vendor, what do you advise customers on as kind of like first steps to get this right with autonomous technologies and agentic AI?
Yeah, great question. Simple advice is to start, right? And the best way to do that is to talk to a reputable vendor. Obviously, I work for Dialpad. I think our agentic system is amazing, and we are really in depth in the implementation. We help you build these things. We help you, scope the metrics. We help you really sort of soup to nuts figure out how you're going to deploy and actually deploy these agents in your system. We track all the metrics on the back end. We make sure they're working. We work with you to tweak them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And so that's really, again, that's a sort of advertisement for Dialpad, but vendors should be behaving like that, right? If you don't have clear use cases in your mind, they should have some already that they can figure out how to apply to your business, right? Or more generic ones like that IT help desk example, right? That I talked about earlier. That's not really, industry specific. But in any case, they should be able to evaluate your business, think of use cases that they've already solved in market, and be able to apply this technology directly to your business. So they should come with the use cases for you. They should come with a sense of ROI to the table. They should help you evaluate that ROI, do all these scoping exercise to figure out your time savings. All of those things should be done in partnership with the AI vendor that you're working with. I really believe that. And so the other thing is, the good vendors should be willing to kind of hear your crazy ideas as well. Like, hey, could AI do that? Because the answer to that question is more and more so becoming yes, right? So we're really at a moment where the art of the possible is being brought to bear, and the vendor that you work with should be very encouraging of those things too, because no use case is too crazy. I mean, sure, there are some that the technology just can't serve at the moment, obviously, but I found in working with customers, folks are generally very grounded in the use cases that they're bringing to bear and want to solve with AI. It's just very often that they're industry or vertical specific, something that we at Dialpad wouldn't necessarily know. So it's getting in there, fleshing out the minutia of that use case, and making something generic that we have very, very specific to solve the problems that your business is facing. So that's what I'd say. Talk to somebody. They should have it all mapped out for you. If you don't know what to do, they should be able to help you. And if you do know what to do, they should be meeting you right in the middle and being like, yes, that's awesome. Let's go tackle that problem. Right.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad you said that. That's a good way to land, because AI, as you say, it's not a point solution that solves one thing. It's not like an ACD that just does one particular task. It's a framework for, as you say, reimagining what's possible. And you may be surprised at all the things it can do and all the use cases you can cook up that you say, even if it doesn't work, you've tried, but you will, 9 times out of 10, you'll come up with something new you hadn't thought of before. And that's what makes AI so exciting, because it doesn't have any boundaries. So with that, we're on time. So I want to thank you, Calvin, for joining us today. Appreciate your being here with me. And also thank you, everyone out there, for listening to our podcast. We hope you took a lot away from the discussion we've had today. And for further information on what we've been talking about, please go over to dialpad.com. We'll be back next week with another episode in our podcast series. And until then, make sure you subscribe to this podcast on all the major platforms and follow the conversation here on the socials for at EM360Tech on both X and LinkedIn. And for more great daily content, you can head over to their website at em360tech.com. And with that, I'm Jon Arnold, and thank you all for listening.